This is the Uprising Revival channel. Welcome to today's show. I wanted to do a video on this a couple of years ago, and I wasn't able to get the video up because I actually showed this article, which is from a website called mybagellearning.com. Well, obviously that's not the real word, but you can fill in the blank if you're not familiar with what I'm referencing. And it's in regards to all the depravity we see going on in the world today. Because I think a lot of times people wake up and they go, how did we get here? How all of a sudden do we have 75 pronouns and genders and et cetera, et cetera? How do we have people acting and behaving like this? How all of a sudden have we gone from the days of somebody who is cross-dressing on a street corner in a city where everybody would point, stare, and laugh to allowing our children to do the same exact thing? And people don't start to think and sit there and say, well, how did this happen? How did this happen? They pretty much just go, oh, these crazy libs, these crazy Dems. But in reality, this all comes from a certain book, the same book I've been referencing over and over again, about how Christians are deceived because they don't know what these people are really teaching in their books, and they don't know what these people really want to do to society. And while these people continue to play victims, they're the people responsible for the fall of the West. They're the people who have destroyed the United States of America by design. They hate Christians, they hate humanity, and they certainly hate and detest children. So I'm going to read, I can't show you the article on the screen, but believe it or not, it might shock some of you. These books I've talked about that end in the word mud, start with the word towel. These are the books that they teach and learn from and read. It doesn't mean every single one of them, but the majority of them do. And inside of these books, they actually have something like 8 genders that they talk about. At least 8 genders that are talked about. So we can see the origins of where all this insanity comes from. Because just like I talk about with Satanists normalizing all these things, they're normalizing all of the things inside of their book in our society, because Satanism and their book is the same exact thing. So this book where Christians would go, oh, I don't believe that's really in their book. Oh, it's in their book, and I'll read verbatim for you what their book says. And then you could start putting things together and realizing that they're in control and they're the ones responsible for really the fall of man that we're seeing. They're the ones responsible for the insane stuff that's being addressed in Congress and how the media is trying to convince you that this stuff is normal. So the article goes on to say, thought non-binary gender was a modern concept, ? Think again. The ancient Bagel's understanding of gender was far more nuanced than many assume. The Mud Book, a huge and authoritative Bagel book of legal traditions, contains in fact no less than 8 gender designations, including, and I'm going to pronounce these wrong, they're all the names. I'll just skip the names. There's 8 of them. Okay. Just, they're in Bagelish terms, Hebrew. Excuse me. So I'll just tell you what the 8 genders are. And then you could start figuring out, oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds a lot like some of the insane stuff which has different names in our culture. But the 8 genders are male and female, which are the only 2 real genders. Then number 3, a person having both male and female characteristics is a gender. Number 4, a person lacking sexual characteristics. Sounds like non-binary. Number 5, identified female at birth, but later naturally developing male characteristics. Number 6, a person identified female at birth, but later developing male characteristics through human intervention. Number 7, identified male at birth, but later naturally developing female characteristics. Number 8, identified male at birth and later developing female characteristics through human intervention. Those are the 8 mentioned, at least in this article. Now, we have to remember, with all this insanity going on, people don't realize where it's coming from. They just think that people are, and even Christians, they start accepting, they're like, oh, they've got mental health problem. This is the reason that people are having these issues is because it's been indoctrinated and ingrained in them as normal. And that's because they've been normalizing all of their wickedness from their books and their teachings into our culture and our society. It comes directly from them. The same people the church is fully behind, right? The church is fully behind. And who do you think funds these churches that I talk about? They fund it. The Bagels fund these churches that allow people cross-dressing coming into the church and then corrupting it and polluting it. You see some of these mega churches that do that. they're not just a church on a street corner somewhere. They're churches with lots of money. And it comes directly, the orders come directly from them, and that's why they've tied, Bagelism into the church. So this book, if the Bible had this in there, right, people would be like, whoa, what's going on here, right? And we get criticized for all this stuff in our books. How convenient that this is becoming normalized in our society as these people that you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to look at, you're not allowed to blink at, and the people who control the mainstream media have infiltrated this into our society, brainwashing people into bobatizing themselves, brainwashing people into thinking they're born this way or born that way. So the article goes on to say, in fact, not only did the rabies recognize 6 genders that were neither male nor female, they had a tradition that the first human being was both. Versions of the Midrash are found throughout rabies literature, including in the Book of Mud, which I'm referencing here. Rabbi Yeremah ben Elazar also said that Adam was first created with 2 faces, one male and the other female. As it is stated, quote, "You have formed me behind and before and laid your hand upon me." This rabbi imagines that the first human was created both male and female with 2 faces. Later, this original human being was separated and became 2 distinct people, Adam and Eve. According to this midrash, then, the first human being was, to use contemporary parlance, non-binary. Offers a slightly different version of Rabbi's Yeremah's teaching. Rabbi's Yeremah, in the hour when the Holy One created the first human, he created him as an androgynous, one having both male and female sexual characteristics. As it is said, male and female, he created them, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. Said the rabbis, in the hour when the Holy One created the first human, he created for him a double face and sawed him and made him backs, a back here and a back there. As it is said, behind and before you formed me. Psalms 139, verse 5. And of course, this is not true. This is them corrupting and twisting the word. And Christians don't realize that this is what they do. They corrupt and twist the word so that no laws abide to them, that they can do all sorts of depraved acts. And the fact that they're so sick that they would even interpret Adam and Eve as one being just shows you what we're dealing with here, right? And this has all been leaked into our culture from their books and their teachings. They're the ones who control the media. They're the ones who have brainwashed the majority of our society with this garbage. So, as I continue on, in this version of the teaching, the rabies is not focusing on the first human's face, or rather faces, but on their sex organs. They have both. Baphomet, anyone? The Midrash imagines this original human looks something like a man and woman conjoined at the back, so that one side is a woman's face and a woman's sex organs, and the other side has a man's face and sex organs. Then God split the original person in half, creating the first man and woman. Ancient history buffs will recognize this image as similar to the character Aristophanes' description of the first humans as both male and female, eventually sundered to create lone males and females, forever madly seeking one another for the purposes of reuniting to experience the primordial state. For the rabies, the androgynois wasn't just a thing of the mystic past. They were, in fact, a recognized gender category in their present, though not with 2 heads, only both kinds of sex organs. Sound familiar? The term appears no less than 32 times in the Mishnah and 283 times in the Mud book. Most of these citations are not variations of this myth, but rather discussions that consider how Bagel's laws apply to one who has both male and female sex characteristics. That the androgynous is, from a perspective neither male nor female, is confirmed in their book, Mishnah Bikurim, chapter 4, verse 1, which states this explicitly. The androgynois is in some ways like men, and in other ways like women. In other ways, he is like men and women. And in others, he is like neither men nor woman. Because Bagel has no gender-neutral pronoun, the Mishnah uses a male pronoun for the androgynois, though this is obviously insufficient given the rabies descriptions of this person. Reading on, we find that the andronoids is for the rabies in many ways like a man. They dress like a man. They are obligated in all commandments like a man. They marry women, and their white emissions lead to impurity. However, in other ways, the androgynoids is like a woman. They do not share in inheritance like sons. They do not eat of sacrifices that are reserved only for men, and their red discharge leads to impurity. The Mishnah goes on to list ways in which an androgynous is just like any other person, like any human being. Quote, one who strikes him or curses him is liable. Similarly, one who murders an androgynous is, well, a murderer. But the androgynous is also unlike a man or a woman in other important legal respects. For instance, such a person is not liable for entering the temple in a state of impurity as both a man and woman would be. As should now be clear, the rabies' interest in these gender ambiguous categories is largely legal, since halakha was structured for a world in which most people were either male or female. Applying the law to individuals who didn't fall neatly into one of these two categories was challenging. As Rabies Yos remarks in this same chapter of the Mishnah, the androgynous is a unique creature, and the sages could not decide about him. In many cases, the androgynous is lumped together with other kinds of non-binary persons, as well as other marginalized populations, including women, slaves, the disabled, and minors. For example, concerning participation in the three pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, during which the bagels of antiquity would travel to the temple in Jerusalem, the Mishnah opens with, quote, all are obligated on the three pilgrimage festivals to appear in the temple and sacrifice an offering, except for a deaf mute, an imbecile, and a minor, and a tum-tum, and an androgynous woman, and slaves who are not emancipated, and the lame, the blind, the sick, and the old, and one who is unable to ascend to Jerusalem on his own legs. As this Mishnah indicates, it is only healthy, free adult men who are obligated to appear at the temple to observe the pilgrimage festivals. People who are not adult men and men who are enslaved or too old or unwell to make the journey are exempt. As we've already stated, the androgynous was not only the person of ambiguous gender identified by the rabies. Similarly, the rabies recognize one whose sexual characteristics are lacking or difficult to determine, called a tum-tum. I feel like I'm reading to a 2-year-old. Tum-tum in the tum-tum. In the Mishnah from Bikurim, we cited earlier Rabies Yos, who said the androgynous was legally challenging for the sages, said the tum-tum was much easier to figure out. The rabies also recognized that some people's sexual characteristics can change with puberty, either naturally or through intervention. Less common than the androgynous and tum-tum, but still found throughout rabies texts, who are the Aylonit, the Aylonit. I mean, the fact we're even discussing this stuff is unbelievable. But who is born with organs, identified as female at birth, but develops male characteristics at puberty or no sex characteristics at all. And the Saras, who is born with male-identified organs and later develops features recognized as female. These changes could happen naturally over time or with human intervention. For the rabies, what is most significant about the Alana and the Saras is that they are presumed infertile. The latter is sometimes translated as unich. Their inability to have offspring creates legal complications the rabies address. For example, a woman who is 20 years old who did not grow 2 pubic hairs shall bring proof. This is in their book, by the way. It's unbelievable. Who do not grow 2 pubic hairs shall bring proof that she is 20 years old, and from that point forward, she assumes the status of an alien. If she marries and her husband dies childless, she neither performs halashta nor does she enter into levirate marriage. A woman who reaches the age of 20 without visible signs of puberty, in particular pubic hair, is deemed infertile. According to this Mishnah, she may still marry, but is not expected that she will bear children. Therefore, if her husband dies and the couple is in fact childless, his brother is not obligated to marry her as would normally be required by the law of levirate marriage. A non-binary person who does not have the same status as a male or female but is something else that is best described as ambiguous or in between presented a halakha challenge that was not particularly foreign for the rabies, who discuss analogs in the animal and plant kingdoms. For example, the rabbinic texts, rabies texts, describe a koi as an animal that is somewhere between wild and domesticated, and an etrogis, that beautiful citron that is essential for Sukkot, as beautiful as between a fruit and a vegetable, because they don't fit neatly between, I mean, the fact that I'm reading this is people, I mean, I don't want to lose your focus here, okay? But let me just read the last paragraph of this, because this just goes on to try to normalize this and give people an understanding. And of course, the only people that understand this are the insane people who believe that there's all these different genders. So in recent decades, flaming bagels and allies have sought to reinterpret these 8 genders of this book, the Mud, as a way of reclaiming a positive space for non-binary bagels in the tradition. The starting point is that while it is true that the Mud understands gender to largely operate on a binary axis, the rabies clearly understood that not everyone fits these categories. So this is where people need to start saying to themselves, how did we get where we are? How has this society become so insane? And why is it that these people that you can't question have been thrown out everywhere they've ever been? Well, it's because of things like this, right? And the only place right now that we see around the world that this insanity is accepted and understood in our society and allowed is in America, because America is run and operated by them. And they can get away with whatever they want and do whatever they want, just like they did on the 11th day of September in the year 2001. The ones who were behind it, okay? We are their henchmen here. Our government runs through them, and all these perversions and all this sick depravity we see going on in this moralist society comes from their books. This worship of Satan comes from their books. They are the synagogue of Satan, right? And I see the people still defend them, like, well, they might be, they're still the apple of God's eyes, and they still refuse the 1948. They still refuse to believe the state of Israel. So the state of Bagelville. So when we start looking at how they've ingrained our society with this type of stuff, people just don't realize where it comes from. They're just like, oh, what did you think? People just woke up and they were insane? Okay? They started filtering this into television shows and the media, pushing to accept it, pushing that it's normal on top of the accepting, pushing that this is normal instead of just dismissing this as utter insanity. And it's going to continue that way because they control our media here. They control our schools here. They control this stuff. And if you're against it, what do they do? What do you see the Democrats do? Where do you think this comes from? It comes directly from them. So when the Democrats act and they go, oh, let's cancel them, let's silence them, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that, it's the same rules that apply to them. It comes directly from them. What they're doing isn't protecting these people. They're protecting their teachings. They're protecting you from questioning this stuff as insane, because it's then hate speech, right? Where does all this hate speech stem from? It stems from Bagelville, okay? This must be stopped. The church is dead asleep on what these books teach. The church is dead asleep about anything that actually matters in this world that's going on right now. And they want you to accept it, just like most churches want you to accept this insanity, because most of those churches are funded by these people. And that's what the Bible is referencing when it talks about lukewarm Christians who don't seem to understand how to interpret this stuff. And that's what the Bible talks about when it talks about pastors who are tickling your ears and putting all these things into people's minds that are not normal, like this. So it comes directly from their books. And I wanted to show you the article. You can look it up for yourself. Just look up, if you want to see it for yourself, 8 genders in the Book of Mud. And of course, don't write the Book of Mud. You should know what book I'm talking about. And if you don't, ask around and somebody will type it in for you, but I can't say it because I can't have the algorithm reading it. Now, I have to leave my logo up on the screen and can't show you these articles because they don't want you to know these things, because they don't want you to know how they poison the United States of America. This is the poison pill. Comes from these people. It's always come from these people. Then you need to start asking yourself, why is it that, people have been against them so much, right? I say this about the witches. They're like, oh, poor witches and the Salem witch trials and this and that. Well, why do you think people have run these people out of wherever they've been? Why do you think witches have been hung? Because the way they dress? Because their sideburns? Because the little hats they have on? Because of the stuff they're doing and their teachings and what they've pushed on society and how they meddle through society and, indoctrinate people with their perversions, just like the witches. Oh, what do you think? Because some woman had a broomstick shoved up her rear end, people were just like, let's get rid of them all. Let's shove broomsticks up all their rear end. No. They went after them because they saw what they were doing with children, okay? Because the teachings of Crowley and all the teachings they follow that they claim that they don't talk about the need for children and these rituals that they perform. So people took private justice into their own hands and took care of them. Same with these people that you can't question, that are victims always. Oh, they're victims. Why are they victims? oh, they're victims because if they're a victim, then you can't question what's in their books. Otherwise, the world would rise up against them, kind of like some people are trying to do right now. Well, I shouldn't say are trying to do right now because that's a controlled thing going on. But there's a reason that a certain group of people over there have always hated these people, not just because they took their land, but because of the perverse disgustingness that we seem to accept here in America. And what's even sicker than that is the fact that the church is blind to it and seems to accept it as well. I thank everybody for being here. I hope you're all doing well. God bless all of you as always and your families.